Hello, and welcome to the Spaceship Earth with me, Dan Burgess. This is episode 3 of the Spaceship Earth podcast. I hope you've been enjoying the first two, if you listen to them. If not, have a go. Learning by doing, sort of finding my way into this whole thing. In this episode, I'm continuing my kind of ocean-related, sort of plasticky kind of theme, which of course is a lot happening right now in our culture. And I've been chatting with Tim Nunn, who is a professional surf photographer, filmmaker, and creative activist, as he's founder of the Plastic Project. And Tim and I have been chatting on and off for a couple of months now, trying to sort this interview out. We've now done it. Tim has spent much of his life in or by the ocean, and he has been professionally documenting surf culture through photography and film for a couple of decades, really. He's an author of a cold water surf book called Nunn. He's travelled to probably some of the remotest parts of our planet, and he's surfed there, and he's stayed there, and he's documented many of these extraordinary places from the perspective of the ocean. And while he's been doing that, he began to notice plastics floating up in these remote shores and in the ocean around him, and he basically just started to point his camera away from capturing the surfer and towards the plastic. And I think why this is so interesting, I was drawn to Tim's work because it's a really strong way of showing and capturing why clearly we are living on a spaceship Earth. This is an interconnected planet, it's a living planet, and there is no concept of away. You know, you can't throw stuff away. If you do, it comes back, as we can see. We can't hide our waste, and single-use plastics are a classic example of this. They're coming at us from all over the shop. So in this episode, I talked to Tim about a bunch of stuff. He shares some of his story of how he got into surf photography. I sort of was asking a bit like, what's it like to take photos in massive waves and huge sets crashing on your head. The evolution of surf photography and film, particularly as it sort of transitioned into digital, because Tim started his work probably about, I think we're quite similar ages. So, he started with analog and using film, and the transition to digital. And he talks about some of his tales of travelling and surfing and camping in some of the sort of coldest and most remote parts of the planet. And then the sort of birth of the Plastic Project as he started to document the plastic ocean situation along with other photographers. And Tim's got a new film coming out. It's a short film coming out this summer from the Plastic Project, which he's built with a network of other pro surf photographers around the world, which basically starts to tell the story of ocean plastics that's really been coming over sort of 20-year plus span to the mess we currently find ourselves in today. And this film sort of documents some of that, as well as kind of showing us the sort of extraordinary beauty and adventure and all kinds of other amazing stuff that the ocean offers us as humans if we could all just start to sort of value it, really. So that's coming. So it was a really good chat with Tim. We talk about all of this stuff. We also talk about some of the kind of challenges around how do we evolve from this kind of fast consumption-led disposable culture, which is where plastic really is the kind of central kind of actor to this system of fast consumption. It's so embedded in how we go about our crazy fast lives. So the whole transition away from that to something slower, more considered than life-centered, as I would say. Anyway, hope you enjoy. Here we go, and here's Tim. Tim.
Hi Dan, how are you?
I'm good. How's it going?
Yeah, not too bad.
Yeah, where are you now, by the way? Where are you based?
In Hossegor.
Tell us a bit about Hossegor, because I guess there's obviously folks that won't know, the place and stuff. Tell us a little bit about it and what drew you there.
Well, it's kind of, it's it is the centre of European surfing.
Yeah.
So it is where not every surf company is based, but most, and it's arguably one of the best beach breaks in the world as well. So it's kind of the hub of what goes on in Europe, basically. So
right.
Yeah. It's a bit of a weird place. It's a real mix of what's quite a wealthy, I guess, beach resort town and surfing, really. So This time of year very empty.
Yes.
And then incredibly busy for about 2 months in the summer.
I can imagine. Give me, just like before we get into sort of now, give me just a bit of I guess a bit of context of your story, really I guess how you came to be doing what you're doing.
Yeah,
right?
Sure. So I have a sort of environmental background because I did environmental science / geography at university, so I've always had a pretty big kind of passion for that side of things anyway.
Yeah.
But I didn't carry it on after university. I sort of went into filming and then photography, and it was sort of one of those sort of a bit lucky really. I did quite a lot of filming, and then I was actually going to give up, and my best friend Roger Sharp became editor of Surf Europe, and at the same time I ended up sharing a house with a guy called Alex, who was the founder of the Surfer's Path magazine as well. So I ended up sort of shooting for both of them, and then becoming photo editor, and then editor of Wavelength. So
got it. And did you already? I mean, tell us about your connection to the ocean. Was that already there? And tell me about.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was absolutely there because I literally grew up on one of the Norfolk Broads, and so I sort of sailed windsurf from a very young age and done a lot of kind of dinghy sailing on the sea, and then I got into, even up in Norfolk we surfed quite a bit from a young age. So yeah, I had a pretty solid sort of connection to the ocean and water from the word go. There was always going to be some kind of. I chose to go to Aberystwyth University because they had a sailing club and there was surf there. That wasn't based on academic, academic, that sort of thing. So you effectively have been shaped by the environment. Yes, yeah. So I've never been very far away.
Yeah.
From the ocean, apart from a 6-month stint in Milton Keynes. I've always lived right by the sea.
That's quite an achievement, actually.
Just
only 6 months and in Milton Keynes.
Well, it was I didn't really like Milton Keynes much, but it was amazing to get to places from there, I've got to say.
Yes.
So, get anywhere in about 2 hours, it seems.
Yeah. And so you say it started more with filmmaking. And then how did you switch to photo? Tell me about that. That's kind of switch.
Well, I'll tell you what happened. What happened was my best mate Roger Sharpie, who's now the editor of Carve Mag. He was really into photography, and I was quite into photography. And we went off around the world and surfing, and he shot a lot. And then I was pretty interested in the filming side of things, and I just literally got a camcorder and started making some films and filming for other people. And I made about 13 or 14 films, but this was back in the days of sort of VHS and DVDs.
So
way before.
So roughly when's this, year-wise? This would be
late 90s, I suppose, was the peak of it.
Yeah.
And then it was people probably wouldn't understand it now, but then it was a laborious and you essentially film for a year and then put a film out, or maybe if you really planned when you could do one in 6 months, and then you put a film out, then you had to travel with it and promote it, and you physically mail ordered things. It wasn't like you film for a few days and put it straight onto Vimeo or something. And it was a lot of investment. You generally actually sort of broke even on it, but the actual long process of making a film was actually used to get me down a bit. And so the photography side of it, it was a mixture of Alex and Sharpie getting me into telling me you need to start shooting, because there wasn't many people shooting in England at the time.
Yeah.
And also it was part of that when you did a photography project, you literally went and you shot something for a week or two and you created something out of it. And I liked the fact that you could then, you created something in a couple of weeks and it was out there, rather than spending a whole year doing something, basically.
So you could basically get stuff out into the world a lot faster.
That's right. Yeah.
But even then, I guess, even from photography, you're still talking having to develop photos and.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it still started off with it was all film to start with.
Yeah.
I mean, I was. Yeah, I suppose. I was still well into the film bit. Digital didn't come along. I was pretty early adopter of digital, but. I'd spent a good 4 years of shooting film.
Yeah.
5 years, yeah. So that was pretty time consuming, but it was also the kind of swings and roundabouts really with film and digital, because the remuneration was way better then.
Yeah.
And there were a lot less people doing it.
Yeah.
So it was worth the worth the hassle.
But that's quite I guess that whole transition as well, from a sort of more from an artist's perspective, is like, I guess you're taking pictures, and again you're trusting you've got the shots as well, right? Because
that's right, you
can't see them,
and it definitely helped being a film photographer first.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely helped, because I mean, having worked on like a picture desk or essentially, you used to see a lot of people who really weren't very, that they'd come to digital and didn't understand the basics of exposure and things like that.
Yeah.
And so you just get terrible pictures coming in which you couldn't recover, and they were good photographs, but technically not really usable. So yeah, so coming from a film background was actually good, because you actually learn how to use a camera properly, basically. So.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
but the transition was hard though, because at the start there was, the quality was sucked for ages, and the speed and the quality wasn't very good, and it took a while. It was very difficult, because magazines suddenly didn't want to start paying for scanning and film anymore, and there was a period for quite a while where really, although the digital cameras were okay, they weren't as good as film. So it was a bit of a tricky bit of that.
And I guess it's probably changed again, but I guess when these transitions were happening from film to digital, like, did it change the sort of, I don't know, the creativity or the experience, or was there any difference for you? Or
yeah, the great thing about digital is that there's no excuse never to not shoot. And back in the day with film, especially in the UK and Northern Europe, there were days when it was so dark and dingy you didn't want to waste film, even if it was epic. And black and white, we preferred to shoot on transparencies, and black and white transparencies weren't particularly great. There was one for a short while which was good, so you tended to be quite cautious what you shot. But I think it definitely enhanced creativity, but it also made people ridiculous on how much they submitted and things like that as well. So that made it difficult.
And taking photos in the ocean, and in waves, and it's a big deal
when it comes to actually wave knowledge and everything. It is. So
yeah. I'm guessing.
And you did, and especially when you get into serious waves. I mean, this week was pretty heavy down here, and you have a lot of experience. There's only a couple of guys out swimming, and it's actually quite a workout as well. And it's just about knowledge of how waves break more than anything. So
yeah, and to give us a sense of like this sort of waves you've found yourself in amongst at times in terms of scale.
I mean, I've spent a lot of time in places like Hawaii and places like that, and I mean down here in France and Ireland, because I've spent so much time in the water, it's not really a massive issue for me now. But you kind of do, you're much more cautious than people think you are, and very very well where things break, and there's actually a lot of kind of research and study, etc., of looking at it. So it's a lot more than just swimming out and hoping sort of thing. So
yeah, absolutely. I'm guessing positioning is everything. I'm guessing, and like how you kind of how you're working with the water, right? To kind of like
yeah, exactly. I mean, you do spend a lot of time sort of analysing the conditions and seeing where rips are and where everything is breaking.
But I was just curious, like, have you ever sort of, as you've journeyed into surf photography, have you ever found yourself in situations where you've been, pardon the pun, but out your depth, or where you've been kind of tonked by? So I'd just love to understand how that, there must have been some scary moments at some point.
There always is. It's hard to explain to people, but you kind of, without sounding stupid, you kind of embrace getting beaten around a bit.
Yeah.
As all part of it, and you just learn to calm down. But yeah, definitely, and still do. I mean, the key is always, I find, is generally speaking, the safest thing is actually going out through surf, because you kind of pick a way out, and it's actually quite easy to get out and shoot. Whether you're in Hawaii, obviously there's a certain size limit you get to where it becomes impossible, but you always have to figure out a route back in, and that's generally where things go more wrong than actually when you're going out and actually when you're out shooting. So, I mean, I've had little mishaps. I remember getting kicked in the face by a fellow photographer at Pipeline in Hawaii, and you get into a stroke, and he literally dived in front of me, and his flipper kicked me in the face, and it put me off, and I got a pretty big set on the head and got smashed into the reef. You have little things like that happen, but generally the most worrying, the most dangerous thing is actually when you come back in again, because and it tends not to happen in places like beach breaks, because a beach break essentially, except for really, really crazy ones like in Mexico, they tend to just eventually they let you go and wash you up on the beach, even if it's quite heavy. So like France down here gets pretty heavy, and generally, as long as you're sensible, you can just sprint in and body surf smaller ones in, no matter how big it is. Places like Mexico are different, because they're just another level of heaviness, really. But I guess the sketchiest moments are not so much when you're getting smashed up by waves necessarily, but if you've been shooting in the water for 3 or 4 hours somewhere cold like Scotland or Ireland, and then you have to come in, and you have to kind of have your exit route quite well planned, and it's something. It's the only times I've ever had to help other photographers, really, who are less experienced, whereby they haven't figured out an exit route after the surf, and you get tired, and then you can't get in very easily. So, and I've had a few times when I've ended up swimming for like 30-40 minutes against currents, just trying to get to the right place to get out, and that sort of thing. There are places like some of those slabs in Ireland and the slabs in northern Scotland where getting out is actually way harder than getting into the water, because you can just time it and you can literally swim out without getting your head underwater. But then coming in, the currents are generally pulling back off the rocks, and so that's the sketchiest thing. More getting cold and just having to keep swimming to get to the right sort of exit point on a couple of places, especially when it's getting dark and the swell's rising, that sort of thing. But on the whole, sessions are pretty well planned as where you're going. So
that's interesting. Key. So there's definitely a lot of pre-planning before you get out there. And
absolutely, yeah, you have to find out where to go. You figure out where to swim in and where to come back in, get out again. They're the two keys, because that's the real problem. Actually, being in the surf, you get waves on the head, but generally that's not so bad.
Because your fitness must be right up there. Because I mean, I'm a longboarding dad surfer, who has been pummeled quite a bit. But I know that if I lose grip of that board, it can be quite terrifying when you've got a set on the head, and I guess you're swimming around with your camera and stuff, and you're out there for quite a long time. And it must, that's quite a big shift, isn't it? Of being very, very free, I guess, with no board and just.
Yeah, I think there's two things really. That one, you are totally free without a board, so you'd be surprised how deep you can get under waves. There are very few places in the world where you can't dive and get completely under a set wave, for example. Places like very shallow reefs. I mean, you're talking about like slabs and things. You generally speaking, you find you figure out where the escape routes are through the reef, so you can still get into gullies and under them. There are places like Mexico, like Puerto Escondido, and places like that where you just, if you get caught inside, you get annihilated. But as simple as that. But so you have a freedom to be able to dive under sets, but on the flip side, when you're swimming, you do not have the same speed as being on a board does. So if you spot a bigger set coming, suddenly a surfer's made, the guy you're shooting has made 20 meters to your 5 sprint paddling sometimes, and that makes a difference. But you know what? After the initial swim out, you kind of, it's about sort of just treading water, and you obviously got swim fins on. I mean,
fins.
Without, I mean, whenever I lose, often now and again one gets sucked off or snaps, and then that becomes a nightmare swimming with a camera and no swim fins. Even with just one swim fin, it's harder. So they are the most critical thing, really, I think. So
amazing. I mean, when I watch, you watch film and you see photographers, right under the wave, getting those shots. I mean, it's a fine line. It looks like a real fine line between capturing and remaining in one piece, or getting completely nailed.
It is. And you generally, the thing that surfers and generally people don't realise is that when you're in the water, you really feel the motion of a wave, and so as long as you're not actually caught inside, because you kind of got that circular energy of a wave breaking, it kind of sucks you through it naturally. So you have to really screw up to get sucked over the falls or hit someone, really, because the wave naturally does, but you kind of have to get used to that.
It's time in the water, I guess.
But it is a fine line. Generally speaking, when you're shooting those close proximity surfs with a fisheye, generally you're shooting with either guys you actually know and are working with, or in the case of somewhere like Hawaii, when there's loads of pros, or you're shooting with pro surfers who are they are not that aware of you, but they know how to work with photographers and that kind of thing, so they know if someone's there, and that kind of helps. I mean, one of the most dangerous things is to swim out amongst a bunch of normal surfers with a fisheye lens trying to get close to them, because neither of you know what the other one's going to do. So,
got it.
So.
Amazing. So back to that story, you released the book Nunn. Tell me about that, and why was that?
Well, myself and Ian Batrick, who's a surfer at the time, and as well as and somebody who came along as well, a guy called Timmy Turner in California, we'd done all these cold water trips, and we wrote about them all in magazines, and we fortuitously sort of put together a book, really, and we wanted to do something which was quite, told the real story, which wasn't kind of watered down in magazines or sensationalized or anything like that, and we just wanted to show the whole kind of thing, and it was fortuitous on a number of levels. One, we put the book together, a good friend of mine designed it, and we wanted just to make a really special coffee table book out of it.
And what sort of places had you been to? Tell us about these places that you.
So basically, what we did was kind of ahead of our time a little bit with,
because this was
the
when
cold
this
water.
would be.
I mean, I guess they started in the late 90s, but really from about 2003 to about 2012. And we'd already spent a lot of time in Ireland, which actually wasn't in the book, but then a lot of time up in Scotland, Iceland, Norway and Canada, and what we wanted to do was just to get more and more remote. We'd spent a lot of time in the tropics and seeing it getting overcrowded, so we wanted to get as isolated as possible, really.
So the remote isolation was what drove you to those places?
Yeah, it was really, and it's kind of, it's part of that adventure side, but it's the remote isolation, and we did it on an absolute shoestring all the time as well, just sleeping rough, and that kind of was all part of it. And we literally we started in Scotland, the outer islands of Scotland, Orkney and the Hebrides. We did spend quite a lot of time in Ian's van up in Norway. We did loads of trips exploring Iceland, and we kind of, the first couple, there was virtually nobody surfing there, and we got pretty wild up there. We wanted to find a real wilderness, and through Timmy Turner we got introduced to the Breweiler brothers in Vancouver Island.
Right.
And eventually that was kind of the climax, if you like, of the book and everything, because they actually took us out I think it was about 4 hours from civilization, just dropped us for 6 weeks in the wilderness, and we literally just no contact, no way of getting in contact with people, and what
was that
like?
Lived
with bears,
was that a bit
and all
surreal?
sorts of stuff, and it was amazing. It's very odd when you kind of phone up and say goodbye to, I said, I'll speak to you in 6 weeks to my wife, and there literally is, once you're there, that's it. Even a radio you don't, even if there's real big trouble, we would have had to have paddled out and radioed somehow, I think. So, and you go in with some provisions. We caught fish as well, and we had a little camp next to this wave. It's a really good wave as well.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that was it. And just lived day to day like that. And we only probably had 5 or 6 days of real good surf as well. So, and it was just good. It was good seeing, living totally off the grid. There was no way we could get in contact with anyone. You know, we dealt with bears every day, and there were mountain lions and wolves and all sorts of things like that. So it was a pretty awesome experience. I take it for granted a bit that it happened, but yeah.
And so, did you feel, because I know there's you know, I can't remember who, but they talk about, you know, when we've got about 3 days of culture in us or something like that. I think I heard the phrase, you know, if you sort of remove yourself from, you know, our civilization, so to speak. Yeah. And, you know, apparently it's about 3 days or so of kind of disconnection, and you're entering a sort of different sort of way of being, I guess, a different sort of way of feeling and sensing the world. Did it for 6 weeks? That's a big amount of time. Did you have moments where you felt, you know, that you were really, really kind of looking at the world differently?
Yeah, you realise, you do very quickly realise that, you know, what you're out there and the way you're living is probably the way, you know, humans as a species are designed to live. And you break the day up into actually doing stuff to live, if you see what I mean. So, you know, we did bring in supplies and things like that, but we caught a lot of fish when it was calm enough, and fished for salmon in the rivers and that sort of thing as well. And you do very quickly realise how pointless a lot of things that we get trapped with. And also, I always think that it's almost like we're trying to replace the feeling of really living with things, because, you know, I think it was almost like, the best way I can liken it is being in a real life kind of computer game for people who've never been in the wilderness, in that you actually have to do stuff to survive every day. You're not going to die, but, you know, you actually have to complete tasks every day to actually do things, which, in, you know, when you're at home, you don't really. Yeah,
you just press buttons and turn taps.
You press buttons, and you can phone up takeaway and that sort of thing. Here, it was like, you got to keep that fire going. If the fire goes out, you get cold, things don't dry, you can have nothing to cook on. So that becomes a constant mission to keep that fire going. And at night, if you haven't got a good fire going, bears come into camp and all that sort of thing. And you also very quickly realise, when you first see a full-grown black bear, exactly how, you know, relevant you are as a species in some respects, because they're so powerful and huge and masters of their own environment. And it's like, holy shit. So yeah, I don't know. I guess because we knew we were coming out at the end of it.
Yeah.
I mean, Ian and another guy, Eric, stayed longer, and they ended up having to hunt for everything by then. They'd run out of supplies, and they were like, you know, they were hunting the stuff. But it kind of, you know, it certainly makes you realise it made me realise more what we're losing. That experience of being able to do that, because we generally try to do that in Europe, and you can kind of get a bit close to it in places like Iceland and Norway and Scotland, but you're never that far away from somebody or something to help you, or a shop to buy something in that you need. Whereas out there, that's it. You know, we didn't even know when someone was going to come in and pick us up. I'd given the boat driver my flight details, and he just said, I'll get in as close to those as I possibly can. So because it was in such a remote bit, and literally it just faced straight out into the Pacific. Any swell made it very hard to get in and out. So yeah. Wow. But it's a pretty awesome experience when you're out there, and it's, I guess, a little bit, you know, unnerving at times as well.
Yeah, right. You feel alive.
Yeah, you do feel alive. Yeah, you feel alive and helpless. Yeah, but very fulfilled at the same time. So it's kind of, it's a real mixture.
Yeah. And have you sort of thought about that since, you know, revisiting that kind of experience, or?
Well, I think I will one day. I don't know really. It was a bit different back then. I mean, life changes as you go along, and it's back then I could just go and do that, and I've got other responsibilities now with children and that sort of thing, and it makes it a little bit more difficult. I also don't think it's quite. Then it was the local boys did it, but it wasn't really something that many people do, and people go there now and do it more often.
Got it.
And I'm not sure there's the drive to do it there so much anymore.
Yeah.
I would like to do it in other places, but even when you go to like remote Scottish and Norwegian islands, there's signs of past civilization there, whereas there just isn't. It is genuine wilderness up on that coast of Canada. So, but it's an experience that everybody should. Obviously, not everyone can, but it's as close to getting back to nature as possible, really, in many respects.
Yeah.
So, but the thing that really kind of fired me up out there, and it didn't at the time, because we were a long way away from anyone, and it was the fact that there was still evidence of humans through plastic and stuff on the beaches then.
So was this? Tell me about that. So there's this, I guess, in a way, was the start of the plastic project for you.
Yeah. So what happened was we released the book. It was pretty fortuitous because it was a proper coffee table book, and actually what happened was we couldn't really afford to publish it. And I was really stressing about it because obviously, it was costing about £12,000 to print, and we didn't want any sponsors on it because they'd ask for things and and all this sort of stuff. And this is completely by good fortune. About 3 weeks before it was due to be printed, and it was already running late, and I got a call from my bank, I think, and they said, you had an old loan with us and we've massively overcharged you and we need to pay you back all this PPI stuff.
What?
And,
that never happened.
I know. I'd actually contacted them and they'd looked into it, and I thought nothing's going to come of this. I'd literally bought loads of camera gear with this loan, and it was years before as well. And next thing, a cheque for £8,000 dropped through the post, and that paid for the book.
Amazing.
It was incredible because we wouldn't have done it otherwise. And it was late anyway. And then it actually arrived, I think, 3 days before Christmas. And we had all these people who'd ordered it. And I was still delivering, I think, on Christmas Eve around to make people got it. But after Christmas, I started doing some talks and slideshows with it. And I started to sort of introduce the environmental aspect of it because my background's more in environmental science. And it was pretty obvious that people were engaging more when you had this adventure alongside talking about environmentalism. And I just expanded on it as we sold out of the book. I kind of transitioned it into the plastic project, really, because I didn't realize when I made the book, but I had pictures of like bears in the wilderness walking along the beach, and there's shots of them with all plastic tubing which had washed ashore and a big Gold Cup and all this sort of thing, and that kind of started it going from there onwards. And then I found a whole load of plastic on a beach in Iceland, and that was really the real beginning of it. And the big driver was that my background is I did environmental sciences at university, and I'd always wanted to do something within science, but I've always been a strong believer that statistics wash over 99% of people, and we hear too many of them now as well. And it's really imagery and things like that really capture people's imagination and make them change. And so it was obvious, using especially surfing and the adventure side, that we could reach people that normal things couldn't reach, because you get even from a class of kids to just people off the street at any age, they're interested in it. And that's the range of people I've talked to. I did a talk to a Green Party group in Suffolk last year, and they were all over 60, and they were all enthralled by it. And then I'd be in a primary school the next day, and they'd all be enthralled by it. And it was that connection really of adventure surfing and the environment, with the adventure surfing leading up to, you should all go and do this once in your life, but if we don't do something about the environment, you actually won't be able to, kind of thing. So, yeah.
But like rewind for a second. You're out in these, really super remote parts of the world. You're disconnected from sort of culture. You're surfing. You're taking photos. You're living as kind of, a very deliberate kind of life, just surviving and being present. And you're taking photos. And then when did you start really turning the camera and going, sort of with intent, starting to capture the plastic? Why did that start to happen?
I started it after the book. Really, it was in Iceland. I was walking along a beach and I found totally randomly an old styrofoam McDonald's Big Mac canister and a bottle of Coke, and that was all only debris on this whole beach. And it kind of got me thinking, right, if they're here, this is ridiculous because we're so remote. And then I started deliberately shooting everything as I saw it. But kind of the most interesting thing was the fact that I then consciously went back through my archive and since other photographers' archives, and I realised that I had accidentally shot a lot of plastic. And I then also realised that I'd actually used plastic to make some shots more interesting as well. So I had shots where there were like washed up fishing nets I'd used as a foreground to make a shot more interesting, all this sort of stuff. So it kind of made me look back through my archive and then shoot it as well. So we shoot it very deliberately. And I think all the other photographers I talk to now have, especially in this Instagram age, I'm good friends with Chris Burkhart, who's obviously ginormous in the social media world as a photographer. And him and people like him and me, we kind of put shots up to inspire and help brands inspire people and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And there is a certain amount of we've got a duty to actually show the other side as well.
Yeah.
You can't just show people that the great things without showing the bad things, basically. So. But
it's interesting, isn't it? Because you could sort of, when you sort of think about it, you're saying the age of the filter and the edit and the manipulation and, and you look at how everything from fashion to glamour to, airbrushing and touching. And in many ways, it's the plastic piece is a similar thing, right? We're turning, we're saying, well, actually, this is reality.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Chris has just sent me a whole load of shots for the film, and it's really interesting because he's got shots of some waves which people will have seen on Instagram where he's cropped out the rubbish, and then he's got the real shots as well, which he's sort of which we've got, and we kind of talked to him about, and it's quite interesting he's in places shooting for like a brand campaign or something, and people don't want to see a plastic all over the beach in a brand campaign or something, so they're cropped out. They're not photoshopped out anywhere. They're just shot out. But yeah, and I've done the same. You want to show people the perfection rather than the reality sometimes. So.
Yeah, no, and I think we've all been there. But I guess it feels like we're at an interesting moment in time where now I don't know. It feels like sort of we're starting to open up now to what is reality.
Yeah,
and we do need to maybe widen the lens now and look at these things. Just for the sake of folks coming into the the plastic project. So when did you then start to sort of put the plastic project was formed and it was out in the world and this was now a part of your mission? Tell me what that.
Well, I think I started doing it when I was at Wavelength about 8 years ago. So it was about 8 or 9 years ago when we consciously started to push the plastic agenda. But it was very much kind of a soft kind of push alongside other things. It would be kind of within articles. And then we would, talk about that as a kind of a bit of a side thing, really. But I guess it was about 5 years ago when we were just totally kind of honed in on it and really started. And it's been incredible in the UK how 5 years ago no one would even some environmental organisations barely recognised it at the time, and now it's just it's brilliant. It's come to the forefront with people like 2 Minute Beach Clean coming along, and they've started a revolution where it comes to picking up things, and then Surfers Against Sewage have come along and stepped up on that side of things as well. So, and then things like Blue Planet, getting it out to the masses. But it's a case of just keeping it rolling. And you'd be amazed outside of the UK. We're in a bubble in the UK in some respects, as anybody in any country is, but it changed. It's not a global phenomenon, this suddenly everybody being aware of it and doing things about it. That's for sure.
Yeah, tell us. I mean, what's it like in France?
Well, France is quite interesting because on some fronts they're way ahead of us. Like, for example, in supermarkets have had these. They haven't. Carrier bags have been ruled out long before we did. For example, when you get your fruit, they have these starch-based bags, and instead of plastic bags to put them in for fruit and veg, and I believe they've had those for quite a few years. But then you go to the beach, and they've got the biggest plastic problem here, certainly in the Atlantic of Europe. It's incredible, and they have tractors that go up and down and rake the beaches, but because so much wood comes ashore here naturally as well, they simply can't pick it all up because they're clearing wood out of the way first, and there isn't a culture here anything like as big as picking up plastic as you're going for a stroll along the beach.
Yeah.
There are guys who are doing it, but it is certainly nowhere near as noticeable. So.
Yeah, I can remember down in near Biarritz a couple of years ago, my daughters were doing some 2 Minute Beach Cleans, but people were looking at us quite strangely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, people think I'm very odd. Yeah. So, everyone here is picking up driftwood for their fires, and it just doesn't happen for anything else.
So what? Obviously, as you said, like the plastics piece, the single-use plastics and the ocean plastics, is last sort of couple of years, but last even 6 months, I guess, it's just the energy and noise is really raising in the UK. I guess there's lots of ways to kind of look at this problem, but it's interesting. I've seen. It feels to me one area that I'm quite interested in is that it's the plastics pollution piece is sort of opening the door at least to some bigger conversations about how we live. That I haven't seen any other issue being able to do.
No,
you know what I mean, like climate change, all these kind of things, always kind of hard for people, but it feels like the plastics issue is potentially a gateway to some bigger questions. I think a lot of people on the grassroots, on the edges, have been really happy to see that starting to happen. Do you think that's something in that?
Oh, definitely. And I think, it's made my whole family reassess on how we live, and we try and live as certainly single-use plastic-free, but as plastic-free as possible. And it is hard, and you suddenly realise how much energy is going into producing things that we don't really need, and how hard it is to change your way of life to actually deal with it as well. But I know for a fact that I know a lot of people who are trying to face up to that, and I don't think there's enough people looking at it. It hasn't reached enough people really, but I definitely think it's making more and more people think about how we all live and not take for granted all the resources we have, because people treat them as finite, infinite resources when they're not. Yeah. So I think that's the big thing. But having said that, I still think it's nowhere near enough. You still. Yeah. What
does good look like for you? Like where do you hope we get to? What sort of things need to happen?
Well, I think all single-use plastics, which are non-essential, have to go. Eventually, they have to. Now, plastic shouldn't be completely, taken out of the equation by everything. There are things which it's essential for, and there are things which last a long time. Pretty much every bit of transport we use has plastic in, and we wouldn't be able to use it without plastic because of weight and convenience. But
it's complex as well, isn't it? Because there's some foodstuffs, for instance, that are sort of plastic wrapping helps that thing last for longer, and then it's a complex system, right? Food waste, plastic waste, all this stuff.
I mean, there's a big issue because I try and buy everything organic down here, and if you want anything organic in a supermarket in France, it's almost always wrapped in plastic because organic food doesn't last as long as other food, and thus the plastic helps it last longer. And so it's a real complicated one. And we actually now shop at an actual like dedicated fruit and veg store here, which is, you know, all paper bags, all organic. But the problem is with things like that is because not so many people do it. It adds €10 a week onto a grocery bill, and we can just about afford to deal with that every week, and we want to, and we'll cut down. But you know, a lot of people, you know, that probably adds up to about €40, £40 a month extra on your grocery bills a month, which people can't afford to do. So that's one of the biggest issues I think we face, is actually the expense of being plastic free in single use things is, you know, hurts everybody, and it, you know, that's difficult. And I think we look at things like I think the kind of the rise in takeaway coffee, which you know, because of the cafe culture down here, you do not see Starbucks and Costa Coffee and all that sort of thing, where people sit down and have a cup of coffee in a cafe. But takeaway cups and things like that, there are alternatives to them. Yeah,
well, it's bonkers.
Which exist.
I was in Pret a Manger last week up in London, and the shift to you know, keep cups and reusable cups is happening. Well, it seems to be happening really fast. I was chatting to the guy. Yeah, I was literally looking, and pretty much everybody who was in the queue at 8:30 in the morning had a reusable cup. And I was saying to him, this seems like it's really happening fast. He was like, it's crazy. He said it's really gaining traction. I mean, it helps when your coffee's 50p cheaper. If you bring your own cup. But it's quite interesting because it's slightly uncomfortable, you know, because it's kind of messy with your cup. I've got mine in a plastic bag, and you sort of have to scrabble around for it in the queue, and it sort of goes against the kind of slick, fast, you know, consumerist kind of culture that we've been part of, you know. But it's quite, I don't know, it's something quite nice about it, I think.
I mean, that's definitely going in the right directions. I can remember when we started making the film a couple of years ago, we sat down and talked to one of the cup suppliers who supply all of Starbucks cups, and they had an alternative to one which had plastic in it, and the cost, I can't remember off the top of my head, the cost per cup was infinitesimally small, but when you added it up to how many cups they sell every year, it was actually, you know, it was in the millions. It would cost more for Starbucks to go to this sort of cup, but it was still very small per cup they could charge to do it. But so the options are there. It's a case of, you know, there's a business angles to it, and really I think it's going to be consumer power that gets these places to change. I think legislation is good, but I think legislation without consumer power behind it is useless, really. So,
but it is, as I say, I think there's something beyond the single use, isn't it? Because it is a shift of you know, there is a shift of how we behave, how we live, because they're always on demand. Everything, you know, I want this, I'm moving fast, I want this, I want to buy that, I want to be this. You know, that's a little bit what this is all about, isn't it? Because we
definitely. I mean, one thing about living down here in France is that, you know, I used to live in Cornwall for a while and worked in Cornwall, and then I worked for a little while in the city for a magazine up there, and literally lunch was quickly run out, grab something, which was inevitably in packaging, or you had your own packed lunch with you and you ate it whilst you eat. Whereas here it's very much, there's a 2-hour lunch break. Let's go and sit down and have something. Yeah, so, right. And immediately, because of that lifestyle, there isn't all of that single-use plastic. Because, I mean, I wouldn't know, for example, around here, where to go for like a pre-packed sandwich.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you where to get one here.
Yeah.
And I couldn't. I know one place that does take away coffee, and they use completely compostable stuff anyway. Yeah. Everywhere else you have to sit down and drink it, and so that's a very big lifestyle thing. I don't know if that's the same in Bordeaux or Paris. I should imagine life's faster paced there, but I do think we have to change our lifestyle to accommodate what's going on the planet, really.
That's right.
So,
It feels to me, it's always felt to me that there's an element of slowing down a little bit, becoming a bit more considered. Not, I'm not talking about a sort of, massive transition, but it does feel like without that, that ability to kind of slow a little bit, to become a bit more considered about our needs and wants but our consumption. Without that, the idea that you'll just sort of transition to kind of a sort of like a disposable packaging culture. Do you know what I mean? It just, I don't know. It always feels to me that there's something else that kind of needs to come, as well as all the innovation and all the different types of. Anyway, interesting. So,
I think one of the biggest issues, which covers it all, is that, and this is something which is global, is that people are constantly wanting things at a certain price, or want more for not so much money, and we're producing things which simply don't last as long. They're not single use, but they don't last very long. So you find a lot of bits of plastic on the beaches which aren't single use as much as you do single use, which have come from toys or bits of boxes, or so there needs to be a transition to a bit like in the clothing world, where you have kind of fast fashion where it's pumped out cheap and quick, isn't very good for the environment, doesn't last very long, but then you just go and buy another bit. You need things that last. So
it's totally mad, because I remember spent about just under a year in Costa Rica in 2010, and we lived right on the beach, and I remember after some of the storms seeing all kinds of plastics coming in, and I remember one day walking on the beach and seeing loads of kind of medical waste. I remember seeing like tubes and old drip bags, and and you look at the whole medical thing, and the amount of plastics that are just, again, part of that whole scenario, just delivering kind of medical care to people, and it's so embedded, isn't it? It's sort of
it's incredible. It's impossible to unravel it from a lot of areas, because it just end up costing too much. And I think the medical industry is got a huge issue there. How you unravel it all from that, and maybe you can't from some. So.
Yeah. So the plastic project today. Tell me about where are you heading with it? What's the setup now? Where are you trying to go with it? What
we've tried to do is we started making a film a couple of years ago, and it was actually meant to come out last year, and we actually rethought it because there were lots of films coming out which were essentially just shock horror. This is the problem, and it covered everything. And we were talking to a lot of scientists, and one of the big issues that I was facing making a film was that I'd interview a scientist today, and then in 2 months' time, what he had said about what plastic was doing in fish was no longer up to date, and there was that issue going on all the time, and things were changing. So I feel a lot of the films which have been made have they haven't gone out of date, but they've aged very quickly. They're still relevant with their message, but what's actually in them. So we wanted to come at it from a new angle for the plastic project, something which could show something more. And what we've done is we've kind of taken my photographs and then broadened it to every surf photographer in the world, really, and adventure photographer, and we've managed to build up a timeline of almost 40 years of photography where especially surf photographers have captured the rise in plastic pollution on beaches, by accident to start with, and then on purpose. And we've actually got a 2-decade timeline for the beaches down here in France from 1998 to the current day, and it shows the escalation in plastic over that time. We've got a similar one for Bali, and then we've got one for a very remote beach in Iceland as well. And so really it's about what the real message here is. What we're going to try and get over is the fact that plastic pollution is really bad today, but you look at shots 20 years ago and it was already something we should have been doing about then. And I think the key of what we're going to try and do is to say, look, to people like governments and things, all very well you saying that by 2030 or 2025 we're going to do this, but if you'd have said that, in the mid-90s, you'd have been on target for 5 years later. But now it's not quick enough, basically. it's been amazing what we've unearthed, often by accident. I mean, we've got an incredible shot by my friend Roger Sharp, who shot a session down here in March 1998, and I can remember at the time sitting in the magazine looking at it and thinking, God, how much rubbish was on the beach, and we discussed it back then. And now it's like there was almost as much rubbish as comes ashore now already then, and this is 20 years ago. So and we've and that's really the crux of the film now. It's about how a group of surf photographers have accidentally then on purpose documented something which nobody else has really. There isn't a scientific documentation of this anywhere. It's a bunch of people you wouldn't have expected to capture what's an important timeline of pollution really.
So the film is coming, and you're gonna do a little tour of that, or what's the?
Well, what the plan is, I mean, we've spent a lot of last year doing our educational stuff, which was quite big, and we did a primary school project, which is still going with a company called A Tale Unfolds and CNN combined. And then we've also got an open resource whereby any high school in the world or college can just email me, and then they get like a file of images from all around the world with some information, so they can show their pupils the problem in different places. So we worked a lot on that. And then the film, we're kind of coming to the last bit now, and it will be out May, June time, and we'll do a tour with that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make it free, but we're going to release it. So basically any of our partners who have got a newsletter or anything, they can kind of send it out with the newsletter, but it won't actually be just free to look on the internet. People actually have to kind of sign in, look at it.
Yeah.
And because I think you have a bit more perceived value then, and people actually sit down and watch it. It's not very long. It's about 25 minutes long. Yeah. But the film is really, it's kind of a bit about surf photography, and it's a bit about how we've accidentally captured this. Yeah. And a bit about what we can do. And then there's a bit of how the surf industry is responding, or should be responding, as a leader against plastic, as we're big polluters as well. So, yeah.
And you're gone.
No, go on. Sorry.
I was just saying, what's the ask or the invitation to people? What would you like to see happen now with the plastic project? And
I mean, I think what we're trying to do is actually the future of the project is to inspire people to get out into the environment for the right reasons, and then do something whilst they're there to help the environment. It's the whole adventure with purpose angle of it. It's very much, you can go out and document something going wrong whilst you're on your adventure, or actually go out and do something whilst you're on an adventure, or become part of an adventure which is going to do something, for example. Because I think it's still very, very much a case of we want people to go out and experience what's out there, wild, or as close to wild as you can get, because that's the only way people will actually appreciate what we've got. So that's still the key, very much so. But I think the real aim is just to make people realise what's really going wrong, and inspire them to get out and try and do something, even if it spreads to the next person that they know, and like that. So.
And there's a lot of like companies starting to kind of engage with the pollution issue, which is kind of interesting, as someone that I've sort of spent years of my career trying to working with brands and helping them sell more shit by associating themselves with culture. And there's signs of companies leaning into the pollution problem, and it's, pollution, you could say it's becoming an engagement. It's starting to engage with. So how do you feel about all that? About, and what would you work with, for instance? Would you work with what you would class as currently as a polluter, if they were seeking to?
It's a difficult one. It depends what they're trying to do. I mean, one of our big supporters of what I've done is Surf Dome, who are obviously a huge retailer, and I was quite standoffish when we first talked, and then their sustainability manager was look, this is what we're doing, and they've removed, I've forgotten how many tons of plastic out of their packaging and supply chain. It's huge, and they're now, because they've removed it, they're now influencing the rest of the industry who send them stuff to sell. So that's one interesting angle of a company which was certainly a polluter that have actually positively changed. I could never. There are things like drinks manufacturers who, going to recycle plastic water bottles. Well, that for me is not solving the problem, because those plastic water bottles have still got the potential to go into the ocean. It should be looking at a way of replacing the plastic in it completely. So it's very difficult. It depends exactly how they're trying to tackle it. I mean, I know Coca-Cola sponsor one of the cleanup groups in Ireland, and I find that quite hypocritical in some ways, because the one thing you always find on any beach wherever I've been is a product made by Coca-Cola. And whilst when I've tried to interview them, they'll always argue till they're blue in the face it wasn't their fault. They actually do have the money and the power to do something about it. They could just go back to glass bottles, for example. I know there's economic and environmental implications in that as well, so it's not straightforward. But so it's very difficult. But then you've got people like Lego, for example, and I know for several years they've been working on getting rid of plastic, and they're getting very close to it now. So it's quite interesting. The same tech they're using is the same tech that's going to end up in surfboard blanks as well. So sugarcane based plastic. So it's difficult though, because you can't sell out to a polluter to help them cover their pollution.
Sure.
Basically.
I guess it's interesting, isn't it? Because we're sort of in this we're living in this moment of time where you've got all this kind of pollution in the ocean, and more of it every single day, microplastics making its way into the system. So you've got, on one hand, you've got this kind of cleanup, this sort of huge cleanup that needs to go on. And on the other hand, you've got this kind of, you want to see everyone kind of innovating really fast their way out of it, so that, we're putting the brakes on the pollution actually reaching these places. And also then, systems to help capture better recycling on land. And so you've got all these different dimensions, I guess, that are all needed. So I guess. But go on.
Yeah, it is difficult as well. I mean, because the biggest issue I face, and I know a lot of other groups like me face, is that really we don't actually have any money to actually go out, and the people with money are often the polluters, and it's like, right, how do you deal with that? Because I'd love to be able to send this film to every school on the planet, but to actually make and it's possible, but to make the time to do it and to get it all sorted costs money, and actually getting that money is really, really hard. And that's the the juggling of it all.
Absolutely. So, interesting times.
I mean, things are going to have to change. I mean, the water bottle and sort of soft drinks world is possibly the most incredible area which has to change. And it's going to be the most difficult to change, because it's so profitable, and it is. I don't know. There's going to have to be a design change there, because they're not going to be able to get rid of plastic. I don't think. It has to. A new product has to come along. They could all switch back to glass, but I've looked into it in quite a lot of depth, and glass from a weight point of view and everything, and it wouldn't necessarily work in every case. So,
it's a gnarly old problem, isn't it? Because again, you think
it's a nightmare.
You think of just on the economics. You think of the amount of people that are, employed to produce plastics and sell plastic bottles, and you know what I mean. It's there's going to be fallout.
And the other exactly. The other big thing is that what a lot of people don't realise is that plastics help to keep the cost of our fuel down.
Right.
Because it's a great byproduct from oil.
Yes.
And it means that if plastics didn't exist and they were extracting oil simply for fuel, it would be much more expensive. So it's a big issue. It's way more complicated. It's just ban all plastic. So.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so this podcast stuff that I'm doing, it's called the Spaceship Earth, and it's exactly all about that everything is interconnected. Everything has an impact somewhere, and everything, has implications and consequences, and because it is all interconnected, it is a living system. So it's
because there's also a big which I haven't really tapped into properly yet, but there's a big movement that the fact that because plastics is helping keeping the oil industry afloat, it means that burning fossil fuels is way better than anything else still, and thus it keeps, plastics are helping to fight climate change and things like that as well. So it's like, it is totally connected. So,
So, mate, well, look, it's brilliant to get the story of where you're heading with all this. Just quickly, so if people want to connect in or want to, what can folks do with the Plastic Project right now?
Well, I mean, come along and follow us on the website and Instagram at the Plastic Project, and then I hope I'm going to be able to afford just to bring it to as many people as possible, because the film goes with a slideshow and a gallery and what have you, and that's really the goal. We want to have these really truly interactive and thought-provoking events, which are not only, it's not only about plastic. You're not going to sit down and be depressed about seeing oceans full of plastic. You're going to kind of see adventure and surfing as well, and great photography, and hear from a lot of the world's great surf photographers along the way as well. So it's kind of, and I hope that the way we're going to engage in it is going to really kind of turn people on to want to go out and have their own adventures as well. So
brilliant. Well, yeah, we'll follow with keen interest and see see how it heads up. And just because the kids thing, just last thing, I guess, because I remember you talking about the schools program, where that feels like another. I mean, everyone says, poor bloody kids. We're putting all the change on them. It's all down to you, kids. But there is something. I mean, I did a sign my kids' schools up to the Surfers Against Sewage Plastic Free Schools thing, and I had to go and do and the head teacher was like, yeah, cool, right, but you have to come and do the assembly. So I went down and did these assemblies to 400 kids, which is slightly terrifying. But when you sort of you show them pictures and you ask them like what's going on here, and they're just intuitively they're like, this is absurd. Why are we doing this?
I think one of the big things we have to realise is that it's future designers who are going to design our way out of this, and they're probably the kids who are in school right now. That's the reality of it. There's somebody sitting somewhere, probably in a high school or a college, who is going to go on and, I don't know, he might be a chemist or a designer or whatever, and he's going to find something which is, which in 10 years' time we laugh at plastic. So
yeah. Fascinating. So, amazing. All right, well, Tim, thanks so much for sharing the story of that, and
no problem.
And we'll keep our eyes out for the film and when it lands.
Yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. So there we go. That was Tim Nunn from the Plastic Project. Hope you enjoyed listening to Tim. He's doing some extraordinary things. Check out his work. It's theplastic-project.com. You can find more about the film that's coming and stuff he's doing with schools and all kinds of fantastic stuff, and follow the Plastic Project on Instagram and other feeds. Cool, so that wraps up episode 3. Please do reach out if you've got any thoughts, questions, ideas. Love to hear from you. You can get me on Twitter at Dan Solo, on Instagram at Dan Solos, or drop me a line, dan@danburgess.earth. It'd be great to hear from you. It'd be great to get any signals out there that there's something in this work, work, I'm not sure, is it work? Not really. Something in these podcasts that you're enjoying. It'd be fantastic. It's really just good to get a sign. Not that it's necessary, but it's just good to get some signs. So please do press like or recommend or whatever it is on the various things. You can get this on SoundCloud or on the iTunes podcast platform, and I'm trying to work out how to make it more accessible and easy, but like I say, it's learning by doing. I'm working this all out. Fantastic. Well, yes, we'll be moving on. Next episode, we'll probably be moving away from plastics, possibly moving away from the oceans, although I am going to be very close to the ocean in the next couple of weeks, so there's going to be something. Anyway, enjoy, and remember, there are no passengers on Spaceship Earth. We're all crew. Peace and out until next time. Bye.